All right, let's talk about that boundary layer. So on any surface, you're gonna get this little layer, trees, on rocks, on mountains, on the ground, on a log rotten in the woods, on my table that I'm sitting at. There's a little layer where it's almost like a little buffer, like a little coat, like a little greenhouse. And what I mean by this is it's this layer of air where things are a little different than they are up here. So if we're talking about this table that I'm sitting at, the layer right on top interacts with the air and with light and with water and all that a little differently than the air up here. Now, let's actually go outside. We're gonna mentally go outside. Think about a big log in the woods. Well, this log has got a moss growing on it. And that layer on top of that log is gonna have a couple of different traits. Let's say it's a really windy day in this forest. Well, that little layer of air is gonna kind of cushion that top of that log from that wind. So it's not gonna dry the moss out. The moss is kind of chilling. It's not really gonna get affected by that really big wind because that wind goes right over the boundary layer. Super cool. Sun. If it's a really sunny day, we don't want that moss to dry out. Some mosses in the desert are adapted to do that, but mosses in the forest aren't adapted to not have any water. So I don't want that moss on that log to dry out. It says, I want to keep my water. So if you've got a lot of sun, that sun is going to kind of hit that boundary layer that is also being created by the bryophyte, by the moss, and it's going to kind of hit it. And yeah, the boundary layer will absorb some heat, but it's mostly going to reflect some. So the moss stays nice and warm, but not hot, and gets to keep its moisture. The other cool thing, remember we were talking about how plants transpire, right? The moss is taking in all that liquid that's coming down in rainfall, or if there's, a little stream that goes over this log sometimes, or maybe a wet bird came and sat on the log and shook, and that's, the water droplets fell onto the moss. It's going to use that water to get its nutrients, and then it's going to transpire it. But because of that boundary layer, that little cushion, that little greenhouse, kind of like, it's so tricky to kind of figure out how to explain this. It's almost like if you took a big plastic bag and put it over, and the plant is doing its thing, it's transpiring, it's doing photosynthesis, it's got its little water, it's creating this almost, we can't see it, but like a little cloud of humidity in that boundary layer. Just so cool. So that little layer on top, especially where the mosses are going to be, is going to be a little bit more humid. I don't know if I could not detect it. There are scientific instruments that can detect it, which is so cool. It's not going to be affected by the wind or the sun in the same way. So this moss is creating its own little habitat right within that boundary layer that other plants cannot do because they need soil to put their roots in, and they need, all this space for their leaves. A very old plant or creature just totally finding its niche or its place in the world right in these little layers. Absolutely the coolest thing ever. Okay, so that's all the sciencey stuff we're going to get into with bryophytes, and we'll go on a walk in a little bit of this video, show you all the mosses and show you the surfaces. But let's talk culturally for a second. Society has not always been as modern. We as human beings, way back with our indigenous ancestors of one area or another, had to use the plants and animals around us in different ways than we do now, right? Now, if you have a baby and your baby needs to go to the bathroom, you put a diaper on the baby and you move on. Well, 100, 200, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago, there were no diapers, like modern day diapers. So what would the people use? Well, moss. So they would take little pieces of cloth and they put moss in, and it's this nice, soft, comfortable, you know, sweet little thing for the baby's gentle bum to sit into and go to the bathroom. And then you take it and you put it in the world and compost it right down to make new moss, make new plants. It's this wonderful cycle. People have also, by either talking to indigenous peoples or seeing their writings or learning their history or, discovering places where they used to live, they've seen that people have used moss for not just diapers, but for, they take dried moss and they put it on their heads and they put a hat on and it keeps your head warm. Nice insulation for houses and tents, a whole mattress, or you shove it under your mattress to keep you warm. This nice, because it is extremely absorbent. Absorbent means it can hold, generally when we think of absorbent, it means you can hold water. And while yes, moss can hold water, if you dry it out, there's all those little holes in it, it's going to trap air. And if you're putting that air in the walls of your house, or you're putting that air in your pillow, or the moss in your pillow, and you're putting it in your mattress, or underneath your mattress, or in your hat, or under your armpits, or in your neck to keep you warm if you're in really cold areas, it's going to trap your body heat and keep you warm. People would also use it dried as fire starters. So if they found some dry moss, they might use it to start fires because it would catch quickly, again, because it's holding that air. And the last really cool thing that I found about moss in past cultural times is they use it for wound healing. I was like, this is weird. I gotta learn more. Apparently, moss has antibacterial properties. Now, we are currently in a pandemic, which is kind of fitting, so you guys can learn about this. But that's hand sanitizer you're pumping on, going like this, getting it all dry on your hands. Well, it's antibacterial hand sanitizer, right? It's stuff that's going to kill bacteria on your hands. Now, if you remember from the fermenting videos, there's good bacteria, but there's also bad bacteria for our bodies. And when you have a cut in your hand, you don't want bad bacteria getting in there, because what's going to happen is you're going to get an infection and it's not going to be pretty. So what they would do, apparently, is moss has antibacterial properties. I'm not fully sure about all of this. I think that's another book for me to read. But they would take it, put it on the wound, wrap the wound in, oh, I've made a mess now. Wrap the wound in cloth, and it would either absorb blood. They could put maybe, oils with herbs on the moss and then put it on, and it would get into your hand, your cut, and prevent it from getting infected. Just absolutely incredible use of this small but mighty being. I mean, I'm just so enamored with it. I love moss. I hope you do too. Another thing I just remembered, which I had forgotten to mention, is moss doesn't use seeds. So most plants reproduce with seeds, but ferns, which are also super ancient, don't use seeds, and moss doesn't use seeds. It uses spores, which are teeny tiny. I couldn't even show you a spore because you'd need a microscope. Literally like a speck of dust, like a little, and it reproduces with spores. So you're not going to see any flowers on bryophytes. You're not going to see any seeds with bryophytes. They're just going to use spores, which we'll talk more about when we learn more about fungi later on in another video sometime soon. So I hope you enjoyed learning about mosses as much as I did and do. And I hope you have an appreciation for the little things, right? We sometimes get so, in awe. Oh, the redwoods, oh, they're so glorious. And yes, they are glorious. But you know what else is glorious? The little things in life that we just step over as we're climbing over the logs to go see the redwoods, or we're brushing aside or scraping off. These little creatures have such rich, both, natural history and societal history, cultural history, that we just are completely unaware of as we're going about our day. So I encourage you to go outside, go check some surfaces, and see if you can find mosses. See if you can find different kinds of mosses, right? Just on this piece of redwood bark, I mean, just with my eye, again, you would need, because they're so little, need a microscope, like a dissecting microscope. I see at least two different kinds. See, maybe take a tally, see how many you can find, and then report back to your teacher, report back to me. I'd love to know how many different kinds of mosses you find. All right, have fun on your bryophyte journey. You can call yourselves bryologists now, as you are learning the study of mosses. Have fun. So I am on a walk in our neighborhood, and this is the south. This is a mailbox holder. This is the south side, and there's this whole folklore that moss only grows on the north side of trees. Well, yes and no. Generally speaking, the north side of anything is going to be in less direct sunlight. You're going to get a lot less light, which means you're going to get a lot less heat. So, and moss, as we know, like to stay moist. So this is the south side, and you can see there's just a little tiny bit of moss. I mean, we are in the shade. But if you go to the north side, look, there's tons of mosses here. Tons of them. Now, I'm not exactly positive what these are, but my best guess is that these little hair-like protrusions maybe hold the spores. So this is on brick. You can find them anywhere. Another really interesting place is this little curb that I'm at in our neighborhood. And it's always in the shade. And it's always really damp. And look, a couple different kinds of bryophytes here. Super damp place. I mean, there's like water droplets, and it's super wet. And there's up on the rocks. So there's a type there, a different kind there. Looks like maybe that's a different kind right there. This might be, I'm not positive about that, be a different kind. Let's see if I can. This would be something super cool to look under a microscope. Hello everyone. This is my husband, Warren. And we went on a little walk to go find some bryophytes, and he had a question.
Yeah, we noticed that there were a lot more bryophytes on brick than on other surfaces, and I want to know why.
Yeah, so you're going to find bryophytes, mosses on things that are, I mean, you will find them on any surface, but a lot of the times you'll find them on rocks or brick, which is similar to rocks because of the porous nature, especially of bricks. Rocks are also generally can be porous, certain types of rocks. Porous means that the rock or the brick itself has got lots of little holes in it. Now, we might not be able to see a lot of the holes, or they might look really tiny, but if we remember, the bryophytes don't have true roots to hold them into the ground or to hold them onto the surfaces. They've got those rhizoids, which are like those little fibers that stick out the bottom of them, kind of like roots in that they hold them in place, and those rhizoids are going to be sticking into those little holes and those porous places to hold on. The other thing too is if you had like a piece of obsidian, which is like a really slick black rock, and you tried to pour water on that, the obsidian's not going to hold any water, versus like clay or brick or rock is going to, those little holes, the water's going to absorb into that, which is a perfect place for a moss because moss need water.
Cool.
Any further questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. Bye.